Hello, everyone. We welcome you here today at the Road Transport webinar with Professor Sara Rigazio. My name is Liana Suleimanova, and I represent VVA, the training provider, and we are very happy that we are able to finally go live with this topic and let you know some of the most interesting developments connected to the road transport and some of the most important issues as well, both concerning the new regulation, but also topics of importance when it comes to specifically the sector of road transport and workers in road transport. And of course, we will have time for the live question and answers session. So feel free to continuously send your questions so that we can reply to them as well in the timely manner. And we thank you all for tuning in. And I will give the floor for the brief introduction now to Professor Sara Rigazio. And then she will also start sharing the presentation so you are able to follow the slides and follow the topics that will be discussed today. Thank you very much and welcome again to our webinar today.
Thank you. Thank you, Liana, and good morning to you all. So first of all, I would like to thank VVA for inviting me to this great opportunity of exchanging views. So I hope that this could be an opportunity for all of us to actually learn from each other. And briefly, I work at the University of Palermo, and I currently teach international transport law and logistics. So it's been a great work to do in this field, and I feel like I have to learn a lot, and I hope, as I said, that this could be the chance for this. I'm going to share now, as Liana said, the slides for the presentation, and again, you feel free to answer any questions you have. Now, first of all, I think that everything is okay. Liana, please confirm me that everything is okay. Thank you. What I would like that this webinar represents, as I said, it's an opportunity for having the latest news on the legal framework and more generally having a general picture on this topic, which is really critical and has become really critical in the last period, as we will see. Now, I chose to start this sentences that are taken from the Declaration of the European Parliament about road transport and harmonization of the legislation. And these are the words that were actually spoken very lately in March 2022. And I just highlighted some keywords that I think that could help us to actually understand better this topic. So the EU and the road transport and the European Parliament talk about a common road transport policy that safeguards fair conditions of competition and guarantees the freedom to provide services, calls for the harmonization of the relevant legal provision in force in the member states. And so it continues saying that, of course, this applies not only to taxation and state aid, but also to technical specifications, social provisions, and measures to protect the environment. Now, as I said before, there are some keywords that I highlighted and that I think that could help us to understand better what we are dealing with. Common. So the European Parliament is talking about a common policy. Now, when we talk about Europe, common should be the keyword, right? So Europe was born for a specific goal, which was, of course, at the beginning, just let's say, creating an internal market, just one internal market. And then, as we know, it evolved. Now, this word common is particularly interesting because it reminds us of the legal basis. Okay, so this commonality, these common features are actually written in Article 91 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. So that's the legal basis. And when we have a legal basis, of course, we have something strong, something that it's written. And so if it was written, it was shared by the all member states. Then we talk about fair condition. And then these words again reminds us of the competition policy of the European Union. And so it means that we have this sector, this particular sector, which is road transport, of course, in the transportation sector, within the transportation sector, which has to follow the competition law rules. And of course, as you know, we have the fundamental freedoms of the European Union. And the one that we are talking about specifically here is the freedom to provide services. Of course, it's strictly connected to the freedom of movement of people and of goods. And then we have harmonization. Harmonization is one of the key words, one of the most used in the European legislative text. And in this particular context of the European of the road transport, refers to the mobility packages. Mobility packages are, as we will see later, are a set of rules, a set of initiatives, legislative initiatives by the European institutions to improve the transportation sector and particularly related to the mode transport of road transport. And here we will refer to the mobility packages 1 and 2 and to the Europe on the Move legislative agenda, which is part of these packages. There's also another aspect that we will see later too, and it's about the technical conditions. Technical conditions are, of course, very important because they refer to the practical side of this topic. And so if we do not have a technical environment which is fair, which is correct, which is well built, we cannot have a good outcome. And we will see that later, specifically related to the digital context. And then we have a social profile. This is particularly interesting because differently from other settings, differently from other countries, and differently from, for example, other countries like, for example, North America or other places, the European Union has a specific feature, which is the social goal. So every policy is, of course, concentrated on a technical and specific aspect, but then there's always, and quite always, almost always, a social aspect, which actually runs together with the technical one. And here we're talking about the driving time, the rest periods, and generally speaking, to the working conditions for road workers, for road drivers. And then we have the environment. Environment, especially in the last 2 years, has become one of the mantra of not only the national policies, but of course the European one. I would also say about and by the international context and the institutions. The international community, generally speaking, is very concentrated and focuses specifically on the protection of the environment, given also the sad latest data on the environment. And of course, Europe was part of these policies, and specifically in 2019 we were presented the European Green Deal, the so-called European Green Deal, so a set of measures that are aimed at improving the condition and the protection of environment. And of course, this is also part of the road transport. So as you can see, talking about road transport is much more than just two words together, is all of these and more than that, actually. So we will try to have a general picture and then have a little bit of a taste of some of these aspects. So as I told you, when we talk about road transport, we talk about a moving picture. And this is not just because road implies some movement, some physical movement, but because we are in front of a dynamic setting. It changes very often, and it changes not only because, for example, rules change, but also because these changes are depending on the people, are depending on economies, are depending on other factors. Just think about the pandemic, what it did to every aspect of our life, and specifically to the transport system. And of course, the road transport is moving, and it's a dynamic factor, but also because it has a critical role in the European Union economy. So we know from the latest numbers that the European Union gave us and presented that a high percentage of goods are actually moved and transported by road, or at least the road transport is one of the most important legs of transport. So this means that we cannot ignore the issues and the importance of this topic. And then there is something that I want to underline, and I would like to draw to your attention, because when we talk about a road, we basically think that there have always been like that. But if we think just a little bit, we have to remember that historically, building roads meant, especially after World War II, meant a way to put people in communication, because otherwise, think about what you do. You go out of your house and then you go to work, you go shopping, you go groceries, but you just go on a road by car, by bike, but you actually have something that connects you. And this is not a physical connection, it's a social connection, because it puts you in communication with other people, with other situations, in other contexts. And so historically, that was the aim. It was the aim of putting people again in communication after the war, after what they have been through. This is also part of the social profile I was talking about before. And all these factors, again, just represent the complexity of this topic. Probably, and I was one of those people who thought at the beginning that it was a quite easy topic, but instead studying it and going deeply, I really realized that wasn't the case. There are so many factors, but also so many things that could change in just a little time, all the conditions. And the complexity requires at the same time great action. Great action means not in terms of very important but effective actions. Effective actions because road transport is actually at a crossroads. And this means that, as we said, we must take into consideration, the numbers, so the volume of goods transported, the climate change, as I said, because it is possible to to make road transport efficient and at the same time being respectful of the protection of the environment. And of course, there's the process of digitalization, which is actually one of the main revolution going on at the moment. We need to set up a regulatory setting which is able to balance all these aspects. And of course, we have to take into consideration the economic settings. So which are the rules we have to comply with, but at the same time, the need to protect our workers on the road, to protect their style of life, their social needs. And regarding this, I would like you to just remember who the actors are. So when we talk about road transport, we probably just focus our attention on who is actually on the road, but instead there is a word behind, before the road driver. So of course we have the workers on the road, we have the companies that send the drivers on the road, but we have the ones that are usually called intermediaries. And this is actually the area we can work in and within. And actually you are part of this area. So workers are, of course, people who work in and within the road transport, and companies, as I said, give work to these people in and within the road transport. And then we have these intermediaries that put in contact these two groups of people. Now, this action is actually really critical here, because the intermediary has to know perfectly or very well the context they're working in. They have to know the needs of both parties. They have to know the changes going on. So that's why they have all a key role in the economic setting and the economic system. Because of course, if one of these actors does not really comply with their own role, of course, the chain doesn't work anymore. And I'm talking about chain, which is another term that I would like you to draw your attention to, because we tend to forget often that all these actors are part of the supply chain. Being part of a supply chain doesn't mean to be just like part of a technical process. It's just much more than that. But the supply chain is fundamental. And as we will see later, chain is a term that reminds us of the technical process, the practical process. But at the same time, as we will see, it's also a term that it has been used for the digitalization process. So again, I would like you to just pause a little bit on the choice of the words. When the legislator chooses some words, the choice is on purpose. Words are fundamental. When the European legislator talks about common, talks about social needs, this means that the goal is not just to ensure that, for example, rules on the road are followed. It means more than that. It means that the European legislator has a specific goal, and consequently, the member states have to comply with all the rules that protect, for example, the road workers. That's why we're talking about key role. And in this setting, there is an aspect that I consider fundamental here, and it's the training. And this is one of the reasons also why we are here today. Training is really fundamental, and I really believe that the learning process is the key that can really help to improve, generally speaking, but also in this specific sector where we need the practical knowledge on the one hand, we need a bit of theoretical knowledge on the other one. But because these two sides can help the actors we were talking about a little before. And generally speaking, I realized that what we need is also a general consciousness about this sector. We very often forget that when we go to the supermarket, for example, and we just pick some products, that is the result of a long supply chain process, of someone who drove the products there, someone who worked behind and before the road drivers could actually bring the product to us. So we need a general consciousness, and it's difficult to because it's easier to say but difficult to put in practice. But one of the things that probably can help is the fact that through a good training activity, we can actually, as I said, learn from all the actors and probably learn how to address the issues that we are faced with. And at the same time, I strongly invite you to think that when we talk about road transport or, for example, other mode of transport, we're not just talking about a single box. We're talking about a general context that needs all the pieces of the puzzle just to fit in one with each other. That's how probably the transportation system in general, so all the different transport modes can actually work together, because one of the also of the challenges of the road transport is just to fit in the so-called multimodal transport, right? So the transport that uses at least two different legs of transport. So if we have to say and to tell what is road transport about, we need also to remember that we're not just talking about freight goods, but we're talking also about passengers, right? And if we talk about passengers, we talk about people. And so we need to give different answers and different solutions to different needs. Because, of course, if we're talking about passengers' rights, we're talking about different needs of goods rights in terms of transporting them. And of course, the answers, or most of the answers, must be given in terms of legal framework and context. This doesn't mean at the same time that the legal framework shouldn't be connected with all the other factors that, for example, we briefly talked about before. And so it calls for policy actions. But the legal framework does this. Basically, it gives us, as I told you at the beginning, when we have a common frame, Article 91, for example, right? So this is the basis, the legal basis for what we want to do, and gives us also the legitimate basis to operate, okay? Actually, when I said that road transport calls for different actions and regarding the different needs, I am referring in particular to the fact that we talk about road transport, and particularly we focus on the safety issues that are referred not only to the drivers, but also to the transport mode itself. So, for example, respecting the other users of the road, or regarding the modes, the modality of transportation, for example, the respect of parking areas, providing parking areas for the drivers. So, as we said, since road transport became a fundamental key factor, economic factor and social one after World War II, it's a question of communication, it's a question of rebuilding, as we said, but generally speaking, I strongly believe that what can be done? It can be done in terms of legal framework, as we said, and we will see later about the latest regulation, and about the best practices. The approach to the regulatory process calls for new ways of trying to set up the legal framework. And there's a quite recent approach that was actually born in the US, and then it was brought in the UK, but it's called regulatory sandbox. Regulatory sandboxes are now very often used in the European Union context, and actually they can help the users of some specific sector to, like a think tank, we could say, just to prove, just to try also some new environment, but of course limited to this box, and can help to understand the issues, the potential issues, the problems, the questions, and the answers to give to these questions. It's of course, on the other hand, the downside effect is that, of course, it's a quite expensive approach. But actually, in this case, I would suggest that it could be a solution. It's of course, on the other hand, the downside effect is that, of course, it's a quite expensive approach. But actually, in this case, I would suggest that it could be a solution.
All right, we can start with the questions for the very first part. And as I see, we don't have any questions from the audience yet. So I will take this opportunity to ask a question myself, since I have this good chance to have a conversation with you, Professor Igazio. So my question for you would be the following. In your opinion, and since you talk about this multimodal type of transport, you talk about freight versus passenger, you talk about how the terrain has changed, and yet it stayed the same because we still use transportation. We still, as you said, go shopping, we see our friends, so there is a social aspect as well. In your opinion, what are some of the basically trendy professions in the sector?
Yes,
right
thank
now?
you, Liana. Well, first of all, the data show that there is great request for drivers, but at the same time, there is no an adequate response to this. So that's probably because it's probably due to the fact that the profession of road worker is not at the moment, at present, very well seen. There are a lot of issues, as we will see, and also it's prove that there are many improvements to make and to make this profession better. So there is this situation where the market asks for drivers, for road drivers, but there is, on the other hand, there are not enough drivers. The multimodal context is, I think that it could represent an opportunity, but it's also a challenge because in terms of professions, because of course it requires an interconnections between at least two different legs of transport. And as we know, it's well known that, of course, each transport mode requires a specific context, a specific legal framework. So the multimodal transport is probably the future. So, but at the same time, it requires a very specific and a specific attention and focusing on connecting all these, also the different professions. So, and also, I would also add that in terms of new professions, probably in this new specific context of multimodal transport, of course, not only the drivers, so who is within the road, but also, as we briefly mentioned before, who stays behind, so who is in the logistics process and who organizes then the road driver's job. Of course, not only the drivers who is within the road, but also, as we briefly mentioned before, who stays behind, so who is in the logistics process and who organizes then the road.
Hello, everyone. Check out the actual regulation, the new regulation that just came out in 2022, to see some of the most important legal provisions that we need to keep attention to, but also some of the problematics of the regulation. Because, of course, when it comes to the coverage of all essential topics, there are sometimes little things that need to be kept in check. So we will move forward with the latest EU regulation, and then we will have another time for the questions related specifically to the regulation. And then at the very, very end, we will have also time for general questions related to everything and not just for the two topics that Professor Igazio will try to answer. If the questions will be very complex or would require a really long answer, please don't hesitate to send it to our email, eures.trainingprovider@vva.it, and we will be able to also provide you with an answer in writing. All right, so second part begins now.
Okay. As Liana was introducing, apart from what we said, and so we try to set up a general picture of what we're dealing with. Recently, actually very recently, the European Union moved forward, and the general context was, and the general necessity was that the European institutions probably felt that a little bit before the pandemic started, and then during the pandemic, transport systems were so affected. And on the one hand, they were one of the most affected sectors, and on the other hand, actually transport system and the transportation systems became the most needed one, because of course, even though we were pretty much everybody on lockdown, goods still needed to be brought to the people, and we needed safety, all the disposals for hospitals. So we needed everything. And of course, we need to transport all these necessary goods. We have to think that the mobility packages that I was talking about before, as I said, they consist of a set of different rules, and these rules actually belong to very different areas of interest. But this doesn't mean that these areas are not connected with each other. In fact, they are very strictly connected. And as I said before, you cannot talk about road transport as a single box, and you cannot just think of road transport just concentrating on one single aspect, like, for example, the safety of the workers, but you need to think with a wider perspective. And this requires to think of, for example, market rules, posting rules, driving and rest times, and tachographs. Now, these are the areas that were actually addressed by the EU, and they because they think that probably the European institution think that it was important to focus on the most problematic issues and most problematic areas. Of course, talking about market rules or posting rules or driving and rest times and the technical aspects of tachographs would require a lot of time. So I will go here just to talk to you about the package and the aims of the package. Again, please look closely and carefully to the words that the European legislator chose. So the package is essential to ensure good implementation and enforcement of the road transport legislation. So here, as you see, the aim is to implement. So it means to share and enforcement. On the other side, it's clear here that the action of the European legislator is to make sure that each member state complies with these rules. The balance, of course, between the social protection of drivers and the freedom of the operators, because you know that we live in the union and we have to comply with competition law rules on the one side. As we said at the beginning, the freedom to provide services, one of the pillars of the four freedoms in the European Union, and on the other hand, to protect socially speaking, the driver. So as you see, again, these are the two big areas and the two big factors that the European Union and the institutions have always to comply with. And of course, it's a difficult action. It's difficult to be able to ensure this balance between social protection on the one hand, and on the other hand, just to ensure the freedom of the operators, especially also because we're talking about cross-border transport services. And so this calls for example, for posting drivers and their actual very difficult conditions. Recently, your colleagues in Bratislava reminded me of the very actual necessity to address the condition of posting drivers. And here, the social profile we were talking about before, among the goals of the European Union, has to be really addressed. And I strongly believe that this should be one of the first aspects that the institution should address. We know that these passing drivers work in a very difficult condition, and also many times the rules are not respected and their social protection is not that much. So here the package tries actually to ensure this balance. There are still differences that are given by the different situation of the social protection among the different member states. So that's why here the harmonization process, the ones that we recall at the beginning, if you remember, is so important, because if we do not have and we do not share a harmonized legislation, we can't really ensure any of the goals that we mentioned before. So we can't have really our unique and just one single market. We cannot have the social and the same social rights to every European citizen. So, and we cannot also ensure, for example, and guarantee the freedom of movement, both of goods and of people. So as you see, and of services. And so as you see, what I said before about this picture that needs all the pieces to fit in one single image is this. So we need to understand and we need to address the road transport from all these perspectives. So in particular, I want to draw your attention on the, excuse me, on the market rules, because these are actually the rules that are applicable since February 21st of this year, 2022. Now, these are a series of different rules. Please try not to be too much bored by this, but I think these are important because they give you the idea of the famous technical aspect that we were talking about at the beginning. Do you remember the first slide, the keywords? So technical. So it's also this one of the profile we should look at to better understand this topic of the road transport. So, for example, the new rules provide that motor vehicles or combination of vehicles, and this is important because we will see that in the digitalization process, combination of vehicles are so very important, used for the international carriage of goods for hire or reward that leave the member state of establishment. So these are rules that refer to these specific categories. And these are the rules applicable from February 21st of 2022. So the fact that the rules provide that the vehicle should return to one of the operational centers. So why these rules? If you go to the website, to the page given with the Q&A session by the European Union, I checked it yesterday, there are a lot of questions by the operators asking why this specific attention. The fact that the vehicle is required to return to one of the operational centers is important, and it actually refers to the fact that in this way we have like the touch of what the path of the vehicles has been. And so also there can be, what can be done is to control. So what is actually lacking right now is that, and that the European institutions and their agencies actually underline, is the lack of control. Lack of control is something very important to address, because lack of control implies that the legal framework is not really well understood, is not really well implemented and actually shared. Control, and so consequently the enforcement process, is something that it's clearly a consequence of a good, well-established legal framework. So if you have a good process of enforcement, it means that all the chain works. Now, it's also true that the regulation does not specify the length of time for which the vehicle should return. And this is probably given by the fact that even though the aim is to control, on the other side, the control should not be so hard and specific. Also because road transport is subject to many factors that could influence actually the practical goal. I would like also to draw your attention to the choice of the legislator regarding the piece of legislation and the choice of having a regulation. The European legislator chose to have a regulation, and as you know, or might know, regulation is a specific legislative instrument that means that it's directly applicable in the member state. Okay, so it does not need to be implemented through a national law, like, for example, the directive. Directives are just warnings, let's say, for the member state, just to say this is the goal. Okay, you member state choose the way you want to achieve the goals, but it's up to you. The regulation is something very different, it's stronger. So by and through a regulation, the European Union is telling the member states, this is what you have to do. And you strictly follow the instructions I'm giving you in the text. So the fact that the European Union chose to have a regulation probably also tells us that it was really felt that it was needed, something like that. It's also true that the regulation does not specify how the vehicle should return. So it can be returned by any other means of transport, and such as train, ferry, or auto transporter. And this is the famous multimodal transport I was talking about before. And of course, again, the only specification that the legislator here is giving us is the fact that the period of time, it must be within 8 weeks from leaving the member states. And again, here, it's quite a long period of time if you think about it. But on the other hand, probably, as it was specified in the guidelines, it's probably also due to the fact that you actually have many variables, and so 8 weeks, it's quite a long period also in consideration of these variables. Also, I was talking about enforcement and control. I think this is a very important phase because, as I said, if the enforcement and the control phases are well conducted, and it means also that the legal framework, the legal basis is well understood, well shared, and also easy to understand. One of the critical points that was actually also underlined in the guidelines was the fact that the rules should be clearer, more clear than what they are, how they are. And but here in the enforcement, it calls for the role of the competent authorities of the member states. So here again, the famous common sharing, the responsibility. Here it's also responsibility of the member states, and the member states must work together in this. So it's up to the competent national authorities of the member states, but of course, it's a common job. Okay, it's a job that they have to undertake all together. And of course, the checks. So there is a verification process and monitor process to verify if, of course, the operators comply with the requirements. And it's interesting because the European legislator uses another term, a series of terms that are very, very indicative of what the goals are. It says that they can use all proportionate and effective means to check compliance with the obligation. Now, proportionate is a term that it's very recurring in the European legislation, but here it recalls also of the language that usually the European legislator uses in all the other legislative instruments, effective means. So it's basically telling the member states, you actually make everything possible to comply with the rules and to make the rules and to make the operators, to comply with the rules. So here we have a different perspective. Before, until now, we have seen that the perspective was just top down. Okay, so it was from the European legislator to the operators, or basically to the member states. Here it's actually vice versa. It's the other way around. It's from bottom up, because here the European legislator is giving the states their responsibilities. Okay, it's telling you, member state, have the responsibility to check, to verify, and to enforce. It might seem a little bit too much, but on the other hand, there is also a profile that I think it's interesting here, because it's pretty technical and it's about a tachograph. And you might think that it has nothing to do with what I said just before. But instead, if you think a little bit about it, it's about great responsibility to the states, to the member states. But on the other hand, the European legislator is giving the instrument, the technical instruments to realize this goal. And tachographs, as you know, are the instruments, the technical instruments to verify, to check, and to monitor speed, times for road transport. So the regulation tells us that the data may be used to show that a given vehicle returned to the member state, for example. So it means that, yes, the member state has its own responsibility, and so it has to take action to monitor, to verify, and to check. But at the same time, the European legislator is giving the state also an instrument. And it's interesting because we go back to the common profile, because again, this is an instrument that it's common to all the member states. So all the operators have these instruments, these technical instruments. And finally, the regulation provides for cooperation. So member states and their national competent authorities have the obligation, this is another important word, to cooperate closely, to swiftly provide one another with mutual assistance for any other relevant information in order to facilitate. So you see, this approach, top down, bottom up, it's actually at the same time going on, and it gives you the idea that probably this approach, the one that gives really the answers, or at least tries to give the answers to all these issues. So once again, I think that this regulation has still some gray areas, of course, because also it's very recent. It needs to be implemented practically by the operators, but at the same time, it gives the instruments that are not just contained in the ordinary regulation. So just to say, in other words, the European Union tells the states, you do that. But at the same time, even though it's still a regulation, it gives both a typical regulation approach, but at the same time also gives the instruments to realize the cooperation among the states. So we have time for the Q&A session again. So feel free to.
We will be receiving some questions that we will be answering as we go. And since there is a little bit of a delay between the questions receiving and the chat showing it to us, if there are any questions that we don't manage to pick up right now, we can also leave it to the very, very end of today's webinar and try to answer them in a timely manner. All right, so now we will move to another very interesting topic connected to the road transport, and that is, of course, and as you saw from the agenda, it's transport sector in the future tense, what we are expecting from the sector, but also how the digitalization plays into it. Because, of course, we now know that digitalization is affecting everything. We see it in more traditional sectors like agriculture or tourism. We see it in the sectors of automatization of industries. But of course, we also see it in the mobility sector, whether the mobility inside the urban areas or cross-border mobility. We're starting to see that digital revolution is at our doorstep even there. So now we'll move to the third section of today and the last section, and that is the transport sector steps into the future.
So it's true that digital revolution is actually already at doorsteps. It's true. And apart from the fact that we daily have something to do with the digital technologies, starting from when we actually wake up to when we go to bed at night, it's actually unbelievable all the things that we do only by phone. It was unthinkable like 10 years ago, probably. We are living in and through a digital revolution context. This is something that we cannot avoid, even if we don't like. But transport systems and the transportation sector is part of it, and I would say also that it has been affected so much in such a small period of time. You might be aware of the fact that the European institutions addressed and started to address the issues regarding the use of technologies starting from about 2015, 2016. It was also the previous president of the Commission that started the famous digital single market action. And then, of course, many other initiatives followed. Right now, the digital areas and so all the areas regarding the digital use and the digital revolution, so the use of the latest advanced technologies, are at the center basically of every initiative by the European Union. And we're talking about internet platforms, social medias, smartphone, tablet applications. So we're talking about a lot of instruments. Now, I do not pretend to go into the technical aspect because I'm not an expert, of course, and probably you are. But I think that the very interesting thing is that the European legislator is aware of the fact that we need a legal framework to work within. We cannot avoid the problem of the issue and just said, I don't want to have anything to do with that, because it's basically impossible. Transport sector was actually one of the last affected by the digital revolution, but it's actually one of the most advanced sectors in this regarding these aspects, because the digitalization process probably also helped by helped or pushed by the pandemic, basically made possible to have the use of many advanced technologies, as we will see in a minute, applied to many aspects. So we're just not talking about automatization of vehicles, for example. This is not science fiction, it's reality, but we're talking about so many other applications. Now, what I think to say is that we probably need to look at technology like an instrument that puts in contact the different actors of a given system. It's probably the most objective approach. We are perfectly aware of the fact that there are social implications in using the technologies. We don't want to go into that, but I think that probably if we look at the use of technologies like something that can help, probably we could find also a balance for all these technologies. Now, the fact that, of course, technology can facilitate the exchange between the actors also foresees issues, preview the patterns. For example, regarding specifically to road transport, there is of course, the application of this technology that are used to preview the mobility patterns. You can actually download the app on your phone, and you can do everything. Just think bigger what it could mean and what it could represent for a company, just sharing this information with its drivers, with all the users of the road. Now, what's actually the framework right now? Okay, there is no legal framework in terms of a regulation, a specific regulation regarding the use of these technologies, generally speaking. And so there is no regulations for the transportation system. What there is a set of legislative initiatives by the European institution, and in particular by the Commission and by the Parliament together, to excuse me, to implement what it's called the blockchain. If you remember at the beginning, I strongly invited you to concentrate the attention on the word chain. I told you it's something that will recall you also the digitalization process, and it's true. Blockchain, simply put in simple words, is a system that actually is based on a peer-to-peer systems. So while traditional IT systems provides for a central data computer, for example, that is the mediator. So it's the intermediary between, for example, let's say a bank and the users. In the blockchain systems, everybody is at the same level. So all the users are, generally speaking, all able to implement the system. Of course, there are technical aspects, and we don't want to go into that. But just to say that the idea behind these technologies is the fact that everybody could use basically these technologies. So there is also a sort of message of, democracy for technology. And this specifically has been also underlined by the European Union, because the resolution by the European Parliament of 2017 was about blockchain as a process to excuse me, to make possible internet access, for example, for everybody. So also think about, again, of the social profile we talked about before at the beginning, here again in the digitalization process. So in this context, how can road transport respond? The use of these advanced technologies calls for a new level of cooperation between the users of the road. Why? Because of course it requires a basic knowledge, so a basic know-how of these technologies, so at least how they do work in a basic level. The fact that we're talking about something that has a practical realization. Here you can see just a picture that I basically wanted to share with you. It's called the track platooning, actually, and it works within a driver in the first container track. And this driver basically leads 3 other trucks that are driverless. So no drivers, human drivers in the other 3 trucks. So these trucks are basically controlled through a blockchain system. And what it happens is basically that there is a lead vehicle, so there's a human being, a driver in the first one, and the other 3 are conducted basically through all lateral control technologies for the safety and to allow all the other road users to cross between the platinum vehicles. So basically here the realization is we use the advanced technologies to ensure efficiency, to ensure safety, to ensure that the process goes step by step. And as you can see, digitalization in this case does not mean avoiding and so no use anymore of the human factor. Okay, here we have a driver, we have a human being, and of course behind these technologies there are actually many people that are working on that. So what probably the democratization process in technology, the European Union and the European legislator was talking about is this one. So we use the technology to improve, to make the work conditions better, not to basically erase the human factor. And I think this is very important. And again, it relates to the general consciousness I was referring at the beginning. We need the general consciousness. So not the common phrase that technology will erase all the human drivers. We don't have the necessity to have the drivers anymore. This is not true. So we see that, and we can see that practically, this is how it works. But in this case, we have, of course, the control, the famous control we were talking about. So if we talk about digital in transport, and of course, the transportation system, probably the first picture that recalls is of the driverless car. But we know all the issues that recently also a famous car company actually encountered. So digital transportation is a difficult issue, is a complex area. So basically we apply advanced applications that provide innovative services. But what we have to think of is the social goal we want to achieve. if we want to achieve, for example, and of course this is one of the most important goals of using technology in transportations, is to improve the safety of the drivers and the other users of the road, to improve their general conditions. And their general conditions, not only within the drive, so the moment they drive, but also after. I remember distinctly that one of the EURES representatives in Bratislava told me that one of the most affecting problem was that there was a lack of parking areas, safe parking areas for the drivers. Think about, for example, if there was an app on the phone or on the devices given by the companies to the drivers that actually has warnings for the drivers about the parking areas available for him, what actually these parking areas are offering to the drivers, at which distance one to each other. Think about that. Think about if the driver can actually schedule, can actually plan the his or her drive. Think about the efficiency, not only in terms, just strictly speaking, in terms of time, but think of the efficiency that can be reached in terms of safety of the driver, safety of the other users of the road, and in terms of the fact that the driver himself or herself has a different social perception of his or her function. This is something that I think it's one of the most critical and also complex issues that relate to the drivers. Road transport was and has been usually seen as a sector that and the population of the road drivers is usually formed by people that have not really very high expectations for their worker life, so they think that this is their life, they could not improve. Now, always and still in while I was in Bratislava, we had the chance to talk a lot about this aspect, which I actually think is strictly related to the use of technology. Next to the general consciousness I was recalling before, technology can help in modifying, in changing the social perception of the driver. Why? Because it can help to, for example, build an afterpath. I called it a so-called dual career perspective. This is something that was launched a few years ago by the European Union for actually a completely different issue that was related to actually athletes that were not, of course, athletes anymore, but need a different perspective for their life because they were still young. And I recalled this action and talking about best practices and, for example, regulatory sandboxes. This could be a solution, or at least, of course, something to think about. Why don't we think about a dual career perspective also for these drivers? Because the drivers are usually males, are usually also quite old regarding the profession that they are doing. So it's a very high demanding job that requires also physical skills, and so we need also, regarding the social aspect, to improve their condition, and their conditions can be improved also offering them a different perspective. So the fact that they could be also trainer themselves for younger drivers. They can actually teach to younger drivers. They can actually be of help in the same company or in other companies. For example, in the logistic areas, they can actually give advice because actually they were the first users, and so they could actually have this expertise. But the expertise must be built. And so we need also to look at the role of different agency like EURES or ELA. So the role they can have. Technology in this can help how? It can help building, for example, platforms where to share data or information, where to share the expertise, where to share the demand, the work demand, because this is one of also the most actual problems. So the circulation, and it's quite a paradox because we live in a digital world, but on the other hand, sometimes we do not know the information. We don't have access to all the information. But not because we do not have a real access, but we do not know where to find them, where to look for them. And so probably here, the European institutions, the national institutions, and EURES and ELA could help in this. But the help can be given, in my personal opinion, through coordination. And that's, again, why I am recalling what we said before at the very beginning about the keywords. As you can see, it's like a circle, and we're trying to close this circle. So every piece can fit in the picture of road transport, but we need to consider all these aspects and all these perspectives. So we cannot just look at road transports saying that we need to concentrate on the driving time and rest periods. That's it. It's impossible to do that. We need to consider the market. We need to consider the physical conditions of the driver, his or her social protection. We need to consider what is the role of the national competent authority in that state, for example, or through the cross-border activities, to monitor, to check, and to verify. So we need the coordination, the sharing, the data sharing. Here is where technology helps immensely, because it's so easy through given platforms to share information. If the national competent of a member state A can actually have access to and share information with member state B, it's immediate, and of course it needs coordination. It needs that everybody is on the same page, but at the same time, this is what probably the mobility package and the intent of the European Union call for. They call for coordination, and it's not just a simple word. Coordination implies so many aspects. Implies know-how, so the technical aspect, the know-how of how this technology work, implies the social protection, implies to know the legislative, the legal framework, implies to know what practically this job requires, and so why we need the practical expertise of the drivers. Finally, I think that one of the instruments that can help, apart from the new approaches I just briefly mentioned before about regulatory sandboxes, I think that could help. What could help is the role of the agency, like I said, EURES or ELA, and all the collaborators, to build the network. I distinctly remember that one of the most frequent observations by all the EURES representatives in Bratislava was that they finally understood some aspects, sharing their experiences together. I think that this is really what can make the difference in terms not only of just knowing what the others do, but just to take examples. It doesn't mean, it could also mean that there are negative examples. We can learn from them too, actually more probably, but it's important to have case studies and best practices to look at. So I think that, of course, road transport is much more than that. We didn't have so much time to actually address every aspect, but I think that the picture is quite complete if we consider and if we remember that we have to take into consideration all the different perspectives. So again, there is time for a Q&A session. So feel free to ask anything you would like to know.
Indeed, we're going to be moving into the questions, and just before, I would like also Professor Rigazio to thank you for your comprehensive presentation. Indeed, cooperation is very important. You highlighted this word, and this is something that, of course, the EURES network is trying to achieve through cooperation to be able to really add value to workers in various sectors, but also to the European Union as a whole in terms of mobility of workers, in terms of understanding where the gaps are and how they need to be covered, etc. And of course, the important aspect that you've mentioned is also the digitalization aspect and the upskilling of workers. So these are also two subjects that are important to pay attention to. And we already see, as you said, best cases, case studies, and best practices coming from certain countries where this topic is becoming the sort of hot topic, and certain moves are being made on state level, on the level of labor authorities, on the level of national employment offices, etc. So we thank you very much for your great presentation today. I think it's a very important topic, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to pay closer attention to it following the offline workshop that we had in Bratislava. And we will, of course, continue paying very close attention to this sector. And just to give to our audience as well a little bit of a taste, for any type of questions that you have, we can also address them for you to Professor Rigazio and clarify any potential or future issues that you have, or things that you don't understand, or things that you maybe need advice on. We're here to help you out. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to everyone for your attention and for you tuning in today. Hopefully, in the future, we will have more webinars where we can really discuss this topic, but also other topics at hand, because, of course, when it comes to the legal issues as well, things get a bit more complex and complicated than they may seem at first. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for your attention today to everyone.